Hello everybody, welcome back to Big Brain History. Today we're doing another reaction video. We're reacting to who's the richest person in history. There have been some very wealthy people in history, and I think it really depends on how technical you want to be about it. Like if you want to consider dictators the richest people in the world, because technically like dictators like Hitler controlled the entire country's bank and wealth. So do you count them as the richest people? I'm interested to see how he's going to make an argument for this. But I've never watched this channel before. This channel is called Jack Pockets. Never heard of him before, but the video topic sounds interesting, so let's hop into it. And if you want to watch the original video without my commentary, as always, I'll link it below in the description. So if you like the video, go check them out. But let's hop into it.
If someone with an average salary wanted Elon Musk's net worth, they would have to work for 8 million years. That's 30 times longer than human beings have existed. And in the time it's taken me to tell you this, Elon has made another $100,000. But the craziest thing about Elon is that he's not even the richest person in history. He's actually not even close. If you look back in time, there are people that make Elon look broke. So let's go find the richest human to ever exist. Starting in the late 80s with a Colombian billionaire who revolutionized the energy supplement industry. Pablo Escobar. He was raking in 420 million a week, but his net worth after inflation only reached 80 billion. Rich. So on paper, he's not even beating Elon. But unlike everyone else in this video, Pablo's wealth wasn't tied up in stocks or politics. He just had literal dollars. He was spending $1,000 a week on rubber bands just to hold them together, and damage to them cost him $2 billion a year. So Pablo wasn't the richest person in history overall, but if we're talking actual cash, he probably was. But let's go back in time to see a very different kind of wealth.
That's interesting. I've never looked up like an estimate of how much cash he actually had. It says 80 billion, but there's no way it was 80 billion. I'm sure, like as he said, I'm sure it's a little higher than that. But yeah, it's something I'll be interested to look up to see how much they actually think he actually had.
The year is 1945. World War II just ended, and in America, millions of soldiers are coming home. They'll return to a blue-collar economy, where families can be supported on a single income. The American dream is alive and well. How's everyone else doing?
Yeah, so World War II, but when the World War II started, the United States and much of the world was still in the Great Depression. And when FDR became president, he tried multiple different ideas and tactics to try to get us out of the Great Depression. And everything he did, nothing would work. When World War II finally broke out, it mobilized the entire country towards war, and that's actually what brought us out of the Great Depression and ushered in an era of just amazing prosperity. We prospered all through the war, and then for decades afterwards. I guess all the way up till the present. But yeah, the rest of Europe and the rest of the world not so lucky, because this was Europe. And the U.S.'s prosperity is actually one reason that this is all able to get rebuilt, because the U.S. is able to do things like the Marshall Plan to invest money into Europe to rebuild all of their cities, because a lot of mainland Europe cities, and even like London, were just completely gone. Like London wasn't completely gone, but London had significant damage. But some cities in mainland Europe, like Dresden, Berlin, a lot of those cities, especially in Germany, were just destroyed. It's incredible that we're able to go to these cities today and actually see them. But if you go there, a lot of those cities aren't original, because the original cities were like, I think Dresden had up of like 99% was destroyed. So yeah, in Europe, if you go to like Germany, a lot of those cities, a lot of those are pretty recent.
It's in these ruins where we'll find one of the richest men to ever live.
Stalin?
Joseph Stalin, the communist ruler of the Soviet Union, was uninterested in money. He had practically no personal possessions outside of his pipes, books, and plain military tunic. He did live much better than his citizens, having access to things like food, but he wasn't basking in luxury. His pay stubs show him making today's equivalent of $30K a month, but according to his son, he just let the checks pile up on his desk, and he probably didn't even have a savings account. The reason Stalin is considered one of the richest men in history, despite technically having no money, is because he didn't need money. He already owned the entire state.
Yeah, see, that's why I was saying if you count dictators, they're going to be the wealthiest people in the world, because people like Elon Musk, who are fabulously wealthy, that is the assets and the wealth that they have built up personally through their companies. People like Joseph Stalin and Hitler and all dictators throughout history, they don't really have their personal money. They control the entire country, so the country's economy is technically theirs.
Anything that questioned his power, even something like telling a private joke, would get you gulagged or executed. Stalin had so much control that after he had a fatal stroke, no one called a doctor for 12 hours because everyone was too scared of Stalin waking up and punishing them for acting without official orders.
Yeah, okay, so that was a reference. There's a movie called Death of Stalin. Really good movie, and it's really funny, but a lot of it's historically accurate. It's such a ridiculous world to live in, the Soviet Union, with just how scared everyone is of dictatorship, that even though it really happened, when you're watching it from a Western perspective, it's pretty funny, because it's hard to believe just how paranoid and wacko that kind of world is, because you have to be so afraid of doing normal everyday things because you might die. Like in the beginning of the movie, there's a play that's happening, and Stalin wants the play recorded for him to listen to. And if I remember correctly, I think they forgot to record it or they just didn't. So they forced the entire play to happen again and forced the audience to come back into the theater and watch the show and clap and pretend it was the first time ever seeing it, just so they could record it for Stalin. And everybody just played along because they knew if they didn't, you could die. It's pretty crazy.
Despite being broke on paper, Stalin had complete control over an economy that would today be worth $10 trillion. See, in order to find the richest person in history, we need to think bigger than just money. Every person in this video will represent a different time period and a different form of wealth, whether it be political power or cash or company equity. And in the end, only one will be determined as the richest person in history. So let's move on to our next contender. In 1909, Adolf Hitler was homeless. He had moved to Vienna to pursue his dream of becoming an artist, but things weren't really working out. He got rejected from art school and found himself selling small paintings and postcards just to get by and sleeping in hostels. Then, after fighting in the First World War and beginning his political involvement, he attempted to forcefully overthrow the government.
Yeah, so that's something that I love to learn about, like an alternate what-if scenario. Hitler was a he was like a trench runner. He was like a message boy kind of in World War One. His job was to run across the trenches and deliver messages between generals and officers. And it's one of the most dangerous jobs you could have in World War One, because sticking your head out of a trench alone was dangerous, because the enemy always had snipers looking at each other's trenches to snipe anyone's head that pops up. And Hitler's job was to get his entire body out of the trench and run across the trenches. It's a miracle that he didn't get shot. So all that you'd have to do for an alternate history is, what if he did? Like, what if he just got shot during his job in World War One? Completely different history. He was even attacked with a mustard gas, and it blinded him for, I think, months. He was sitting in a hospital bed while Germany lost the war. Germany lost the war while Hitler was laying in a hospital bed, blinded from mustard gas. What happens if that killed him? You know? So many things could happen. But yeah, he's about to get into how Hitler tried to overthrow the government. Most people don't know that Hitler actually tried to overthrow the government before he actually did. He tried to do it by force originally, and it failed. And he got locked away in prison. I think he was in prison for a year, I believe. But while he was in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf. And it actually made him super popular, because while he was in trial for trying to overthrow the government, they let him speak in the trial, and his speech was so popular that it actually gained him followers. So it actually worked in his favor. And then he realized that overthrowing the government by force wasn't going to work. So he decided to use democracy as a way to overthrow it. So he won the election and took power that way, which he did use force. He still had the brown shirts going out and using gangster tactics to win the Democratic vote. But he kind of used it against us. He used the system in his favor.
Which got him locked up for 9 months. Hopefully he'll use these 9 months to Mein Kampf.
Yep.
Upon release in 1925, the Racism Manifesto met with mediocre sales. But as Germany's situation declined, Mein Kampf's popularity grew. And when Hitler took power in 1933, the book was everywhere. It was also around this time when Hitler realized he had access to developer commands. He instructed the government to buy 6 million copies of his own book and hand them out to soldiers, government officials, and newlyweds. He then avoided a $2 million bill by making himself tax exempt. His next lick was copywriting his own image, which allowed him to collect royalties on every postage stamp sold in Nazi Germany. Then he copied.
Man, it pays off to be a dictator sometimes. That's a lot of money he's making, and it's just, I don't want to pay taxes. I mean, no one's there to stop him. It's great. It's amazing that people can't see just what a grifter these dictators are sometimes.
He wrote his speeches so he could collect money when they were printed in the news. These passive income streams made Hitler millions. By the end of his life, Mein Kampf had sold around 10 million copies, which actually isn't an insane amount. For reference, he was outsold 3-1 by Anne Frank, but Hitler did have one last side hustle. Between 1933 and 1945, it was estimated that he received over $5 billion in donations from his supporters, most of this coming from wealthy businessmen. It's impressive how much personal money Hitler was able to milk out of his position, but his real wealth came from his military might. At its peak in 1942, Nazi Germany controlled nearly all of Europe, stealing hundreds of billions in resources and putting millions of people into forced labor. So through his conquests, Hitler commanded resources worth $3 trillion in today's dollars. But before dictators, there was a man building a very different type of empire.
So he was beat out by Stalin. Wonder how he would feel about that.
Henry Ford had a revelation.
Yeah, so what he mentioned earlier, Henry Ford was a big fan of Hitler, and I've read that he actually kept a picture of Hitler on his desk. So Henry Ford, the guy that capitalism remembers as a guy that's a revolutionary, which he was. He helped, he made the Model T, made the car affordable. But yeah, he was a big fan of Hitler.
If you pay them more and let them sleep, your slaves won't revolt. In 1914, Henry made the radical decision to double wages from $2.50 to $5 a day. He then cut the work week from 6 days to 5 days. After seeing the operations of meatpacking plants, Ford organized his workers in a line, an assembly line. What resulted was production time for the Ford Model T dropping from 12 hours to 90 minutes. Prices dropped from $850 to $290. And for 50 years, the Model T was the most sold car in history. But Ford's greatest invention wasn't the assembly line or the Model T. See, after Ford made automobiles accessible to the masses, people began moving outside of cities and driving back and forth to work. And after the success of Ford's mass production methods, they were widely copied by companies and countries. The suburbs, commuting, and the modern work schedule can all be traced back to Henry Ford, which is why many credit him as the inventor of the middle class. So despite his measly $200 billion personal net worth, Ford's massive influence might make him the richest person in history. But Henry's success—
Yeah, okay, I think that's a stretch. I wouldn't count his influence as a way to make him the richest person in the world. I mean, you could say that about many, many people that had even more influence than Ford. I don't really agree with that metric being used to make him the richest person in the world.
This was only possible thanks to the men who came before him. It's the late 1800s. The telephone, telegraph, and light bulb are currently being invented. Pollution is awesome. Child labor is legal. Yes! Regulations don't exist. Long hours and unsafe working equipment give employees a healthy work-death balance. The stage is set for maximum capitalism. 3 men would define this era. The OG being Cornelius Vanderbilt, who conquered the railroad industry and died with more money than the US Treasury. The next was Andrew Carnegie, who made a fortune with steel, then devoted the rest of his life to philanthropy. And this was during a time before charity tax advantages. He actually meant that shit. But the richest of the 3 was John D. Rockefeller. In 1870, John founded Standard Oil. He quickly curb-stomped his competitors through innovation and screwing them over, and by the 1880s, he controlled 90% of America's oil refining. But his empire fell in 1911, when the US Supreme Court declared Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and ordered it to be broken up into 34 new companies. This judicial punishment destroyed Rockefeller's fortune, and he ended up dying in poverty. Just kidding. After the breakup, he had ownership in each of the new companies, and their stock values soared, making him richer than ever before. The antitrust breakup resulted in Rockefeller becoming the world's first billionaire, and at his peak in 1913, he was worth 2% of the US GDP. Estimates of his personal worth in today's dollars range from 4 to 600 billion, making him potentially the richest person ever. But before the robber barons, there was a family who bankrolled entire empires.
You know, it's really crazy that we have a guy— There's a car passing my house. Okay. It's really crazy we have a guy from the 1800s, Rockefeller, that still had more wealth than Elon Musk today. Which I think Elon Musk will probably pass him. I guess. I think he probably will. But it's pretty crazy that we have a guy from the 1800s that's still kind of the record holder as the wealthiest person in American history.
The year is 1744. The United States doesn't exist yet. The life expectancy is 30. Cities are full of shit. There's no electricity. In a small Jewish ghetto, Mayor Amschel Rothschild is born. He starts in business at a young age, working his way up from being a rare coin dealer to a successful banker. Then in the early 1800s, he launches a conquest. He sends his 5 sons to the 5 key financial centers of Europe. Every son does their part, and before the invention of the telephone, the Rothschilds have established the first international banking network. They finance wars and peacetime recovery, pay for massive projects like the Suez Canal, and give out loans that save countries' economies. But the Rothschilds have one serious problem. For centuries, Jews in Europe had been prohibited from owning land, blocked out of most industries, and at risk of property confiscation or exile. So in order to ensure their survival, the Rothschilds invested in stocks, bonds, and debts, rather than just tangible assets like gold or real estate that could have been taken or destroyed. Another method they used to ensure their wealth stayed within the family, the cousin technique. Through financial tactics and incest, the Rothschilds managed to mostly avoid persecution. But
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with the Rothschilds, but if that's true, that's really interesting.
extent of their wealth today is widely debated. Some estimates have claimed the Rothschilds have a current net worth of $500 trillion. But the only Rothschild you'll find today on the Forbes rich list is Jeff Rothschild. He's worth $3.2 billion. He works at Facebook, and he is not related to the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds no longer have much centralized family wealth, but at their peak, their total worth would have been the largest single fortune in history. On an individual level, the richest ever was Nathan Rothschild. According to estimates, his peak net worth today would be around $20 billion, but his power and connections would likely have been worth a lot more. To find our next
Yeah, 500 trillion. I don't see that being a realistic number. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with Rothschild, so I don't know how much of that was true. But 500 trillion is just not realistic.
contender for the richest person in history, let's go back to Europe.
But I don't really understand why he's starting with Elon and then Stalin, and then he's going down to these guys like 20 billion's not even close. Like, why even put him on the list? He's nowhere near close.
In the 1500s. Christopher Columbus just got back from America. The church owns everything, and Jacob Fugger is born into a wealthy German family. After inheriting the family business, Jacob starts expanding it from merchant trading to banking, and soon he's handing out massive loans to finance everything from art projects to wars and elections. In 1519, he spent the modern equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars to get Emperor Charles V elected. But when Charles was slow to pay back his debts, Jacob sent him an angry letter reminding him of his place.
It is well known and clear as day that your imperial majesty could not have claimed the Roman crown without my help.
History repeats itself. Church officials ended up getting in so much debt to Fugger that they started selling heaven passes, called indulgences. This led to a protest, which led to a religious revolution. Fugger had more influence than kings, but he was also a nice guy. He made the first ever social housing complex, and to this day, 150 people still live in these apartments at the cost of $1 a year, as well
Wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that was a thing. That's
as
really
3
interesting.
required daily prayers for the Fugger family. At his peak, Jacob owned 2% of Europe's GDP, which would be around 400 billion today. But the richest person in history may have been further back in time. In 1324, a man went on a pilgrimage across Africa. His name was Mansa Musa, and he was the king of the Mali Empire.
Yeah, I had to teach about Mansa Musa when I was a history teacher. Mansa Musa inadvertently almost caused the collapse of the economy of the areas he was traveling to on his pilgrimage to Mecca, because on this journey he had slaves carrying just massive amounts of gold, and all the way to Mecca he was just giving people gold, and he was doing this all the way there, and then on his way back he was finding out that these areas' economies were just struggling because of all the inflation he caused by giving out all the gold, and he had to find ways to get it back, which is just incredible wealth. And a lot of the maps during this period, you know, if you've ever seen like a map from the 1700s, that era, you'll see like how they had like the sea monsters in the ocean, and you would have famous kings on their thrones depending on where they're at in the world. Well, in Africa, you'll see a little, if I remember correctly, it's a guy sitting on a golden throne, and he's holding like gold bars, and that's Mansa Musa, because the Europeans had heard about his incredible wealth. And I believe it's one reason why they encouraged colonization of Africa is because he was such a wealthy man. But I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's a motivating factor.
Mali had a lot of salt and a lot of gold. A lot. of gold. So much gold that on Musa's pilgrimage he covered himself, his 60,000 person entourage, and his hundreds of animals with thousands of pounds of gold. And then he handed out so much of that gold that it destabilized local economies. So he borrowed the gold back, which fixed the problem until he paid all the debts back at once and everything crashed again. After Musa's multi-billion dollar...
Here's the thing I was telling you about. He's holding like a golden orb and a golden crown. So even on this map, it shows the world that, hey, there's a lot of gold in Africa.
Road trip, he began showing up on maps decked out in gold, cementing his reputation in history as the original flexer. But estimating his net worth is borderline impossible, since all accounts of Musa's trek come from secondhand testimony. It's believed that Musa controlled about half of the world's gold supply, and the most common number I found for his total worth was 400 billion, but many numbers went much higher. So based on the amount of valuable resources under his control, Mansa Musa may be the richest person in history. But go back 100 years and there was a man with a very different kind of wealth. In the early 1200s, Genghis Khan controlled more land than any man in history. His Mongol Empire covered almost 20% of Earth's land area, making his estimated net worth today 130 trillion. But this is slightly misleading. Genghis never really had much wealth of his own, and this was actually vital to his influence. Rather than taking for himself, war loot was redistributed to soldiers and commanders to promote loyalty. Genghis wore the same clothes and ate the same food as his crew. He slept in tents and asked to be buried with no markings or signs. Genghis Khan didn't really have desire for personal wealth or possessions, but based on his control of land, he may have been the richest guy to ever live. But let's go even further.
Fun fact about Genghis Khan's death. When he died, he wanted to keep his burial a secret. So he handpicked servants, or soldiers, I guess, that would take his body out into the mountains, dig this huge burial complex for him, and then they buried him. And then after they buried him, I believe they ran over his grave with like chariots to hide the place that it was buried. And oh man, it's been a while since I read this, but I think they diverted a river to go over his grave, so that way it'd be under a river. And then on the way back down the mountain, he had soldiers waiting for those guys. And when they got down to the mountain, the soldiers killed all the guys that buried his body. And then I think those soldiers ended up getting killed by other soldiers. So everybody that was involved in burying him was all murdered. So nobody could go around and tell the secret of where that they knew where his body was buried. So to this day, we have no idea where Genghis Khan was buried because nobody lived to be able to tell the tale of where he was buried because everyone was immediately butchered. Which is just a great finale to Genghis Khan, the man who's responsible for one of the largest empires in history, but also one of the largest butchers in history because they exterminated millions of people. And it was all by hand, all swords and arrows. And they killed millions of people. And then on his deathbed, or after he died, he's still killing people. It's incredible what the Mongolians, just the sheer amount of human destruction that they caused.
Back in time, to the year 1 AD. The people alive right now have no idea that they're living through a turning point in history. They actually don't even know what year it is. Romans think that it's year 754. Jews think it's 3761. The Chinese think it's year 9. And for the Greeks, it's 194. Every country is kind of doing their own thing. America is building early cities thanks to the Mayans. India is trading through the ocean and Silk Road. China just invented paper. And in Rome, Augustus Caesar is balling. A few years prior, he defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra in battle and snatched up Egypt as his personal property. He now controls around 20% of Rome's economic output, and that includes the tax flows, the treasury, the gold and silver mines, and revenue from conquered lands.
And Julius Caesar, everyone likes to say he was the first emperor. He's not the first emperor. He named himself dictator for life, which is not technically an emperor. It wasn't until the next guy, which is Caesar Augustus, who became the first official emperor. Julius Caesar was not emperor of Rome.
Also has a money method where he kills rich people from his own empire just to take their stuff. After Caesar passes in the year 14, he officially gets declared a god with an estimated modern day net worth of $5 trillion. But let's go back another 900 years. Civilization is in its early stages. Most people live short, difficult lives. Money in the form of coins doesn't yet exist. King Solomon rules over the kingdom of Israel, collecting gold by the ton. His yearly tax revenue is 666 talents of gold. He basks in his riches with his 700 wives, and in today's money, he's worth over $2 trillion. But this is all according to accounts in the Bible, written hundreds of years after he would have lived. When we're this far back in time, details get murky. Written accounts are sparse and incredibly biased. The richest man from ancient times will never really know. So, who is the richest person in history? Looking at this graph, it seems like there's a lot of people who make Elon look broke, but these numbers don't tell the whole story. Hear me out. In 1913, John D. Rockefeller was worth 2% of US GDP. Today, Elon Musk is worth 1.4% of US GDP. So Rockefeller had a larger share of the economy, making his inflation-adjusted net worth higher than Elon's. But here's the catch. The US economy today is 22 times larger than it was in 1913. Rockefeller had a bigger slice of a much smaller pie. Estimated numbers don't tell the story of how the entire world has become more and more prosperous over time. Elon is now the biggest fish in the biggest pond that has ever existed. On top of this, his wealth is a personal fortune. It's well documented and verifiable, unlike ancient figures like King Solomon. It wouldn't disappear if he lost his positions of power, unlike dictators and heads of state. He can access it for whatever he wants, and he harnesses technology that ancient figures would think is witchcraft. Elon is the richest person in history, with his 400 billion today. Eventually, someone will get even richer, but based on history, everyone else will get richer too.
Yeah, it was a really interesting video. There's a few things I don't really understand why he chose to go the way he did. There were some guys on the list that he included that don't even really have an argument to be the richest person ever lived, so I don't really know what the point was of including them. And if you are going to include them, I would have included them earlier so you could see it going up. Thing about Elon Musk is, yeah, he's the richest. I think he's still considered the richest person on the earth right now. But a lot of his wealth isn't like cash. A lot of it is stocks that he has in his company. So he's saying that it can't go away. Technically, he can. He's obviously he's never going to be, poor or even middle class. He's always going to be incredibly rich. But if his companies all bankrupted themselves, he would lose all of a good chunk of his wealth because the stocks wouldn't be there anymore for him to or they wouldn't be worth as what they are now. But he will always be incredibly rich. Don't get me wrong on that. But yeah, you could also say like with the way technology has improved, a middle class man from today lives way more wealthy than the most richest king of the medieval world. Just because how technology has improved. I mean, you give it air conditioner, refrigeration, a car, electricity, all of that stuff makes you instantly wealthier than any king from ancient history. So you could look at it that way. So there are different ways you could look at who's the wealthiest person to ever live, and there is no one answer. He's right. But yeah, I think dictators should have been on the list because technically they control all of a country's wealth. And it's really hard to beat that kind of power. But yeah, really interesting video. I liked it. I want to look up more of the Rothschild stuff because it's something I don't really know a whole lot about, and it's an interesting topic. But yeah, I liked the video. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. If you liked his video, please go on his channel and watch more of his videos. He seems like a really interesting YouTuber. But yeah, I hope you all have a great day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.